Good afternoon and welcome to the November 9, 2021 special meeting of the Blue Ribbon Pension Review Executive Committee meeting. To help slow the transmission of COVID-19 and protect the health and safety of the community, City Council, as well as board and commission meetings will continue to be close to the public for in-person attendance. The public is encouraged to watch and participate from the safety of their homes to practice social distancing. Meetings are broadcast live on Glendale TV, viewable on Spectrum Cable Channel 6 and AT&T UVerse Channel 99. Meetings are also streamed live in high definition on the city's webpage, glendaleca.gov/live, on youtube.com/myglendale, and on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire devices using a free app called ScreenWeave and choosing Glendale TV from the menu. For public comments and questions during the meeting, please call 818-937-8100. Public comments on a specific agenda item will be taken when that agenda item is discussed. Now I will conduct roll call. Executive Committee Member Amirian,
Unmute. Thank you. I'm present.
Executive Committee Member Bain,
Present.
Executive Committee Member Michaels,
Present.
Executive Committee Member Milano,
Here.
and Executive Committee Member Finch.
Here.
She's here. Okay, I see her. So item 1, regular business agenda. Item 1A, report of recorder regarding posting of the agenda. The agenda for the November 9, 2021 special meeting of the Blue Ribbon Pension Review Executive Committee was posted on November 8, 2021 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Item 2, oral communications. At the moment, we do not have any calls. Okay. Item 3, minutes. Item 3A, approval of the minutes from the October 11, 2021 Executive Committee meeting.
We have a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay. Roll call. Executive Committee Member Amirian,
Yes.
Executive Committee Member Bain,
Yes.
Executive Committee Member Michaels,
Yes.
Executive Committee Member Milano,
Yes.
Executive Committee Member Finch. I think she's having audio problems.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Yes, my answer is yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, item 4, business items. Item 4A, future committee agenda items.
So, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us at such an odd time. We had to fit this in wherever. So I have some thoughts, but maybe about future agenda items. So maybe I'll preview a little bit of that first, but then I'd really like to get the views of folks. I mean, this is an opportunity for the XCOM to kind of give us feedback. I think about how we can do our job better, and where we should take things going forward. One of the things I've been contacted by, various members of the committee, and I think one of the questions that people are now beginning to ask, which is the right set of questions, is okay. So where does all this go? Right? I mean, we're learning a lot of information about about pensions, but where do we take it? What are the I'm going to use the word solutions advisedly. What are the approaches? What are the things? Where do we drive this? And I do have a list of potential approaches, I'll say, that is by no means exclusive. My thought, and then I want to throw this open, is that personally, I like the knowledge that Mary Beth Redding has brought to the group. She has, I'm going to call it, another half hour worth of material, that of course I'd like her to finish up in next session. But those items relate to approaches that jurisdictions have taken to pension liabilities. And they're by no means, though, all of the approaches or possible things that we could throw out. And so, one of the things that I've been thinking about is, when she finishes, I'd like to be able to ask her questions about, a full gamut, and have you guys ask questions about a full gamut of other solutions, because she's so knowledgeable. She's not the only expert, obviously, that we're going to have, but I do have a lot of faith in the depth of their knowledge. And so that's one thought that I had about the upcoming time. We know that we want to have somebody from Calpers speak, and that's going to be on a variety of issues, but one of which will be investment returns. It's a question a number of people have asked, and those kinds of things. What are their plans? Be able to answer some of the tough questions that some members of the committee have. So that's another area that I think I'd like to explore. I think I had 2 communications from members of the committee that have, which are essentially, well, listen, we don't want to just look at, for lack of a better word, in the box solutions here. We want to be able to consider, solutions that are outside the box. And I obviously have, no issue with that at all. But I think I'd like to hear from, and I know that Herbert, for example, has proposed some speakers in that regard. I think it'd be useful for us to have a conversation within the executive committee about what are the best approaches there. I think out of the box is great. I just want to make sure that we're bringing the right people, and that they're people who are, coming with, for lack of a better word, potential approaches that we can adopt. So I think with that, maybe what we should do first is kind of go around the horn. And what I'd like to hear is, a little bit about, what's going right, what's going wrong, and where, what you'd like to, be hearing in the next few sessions. So I don't have an alphabetical list, so I'm going to choose Allison first because her first name begins with A. And ask you if maybe, just a few minutes on what you're thinking.
I've liked our presenters thus far. I think for me, sometimes like the length of the meeting, and I like all the information, and I think that it's important to keep presentations, detailed, because you need the information. And our presenters are the ones who are the experts, and we should be relying on them to be able to communicate that with us. But if it's like a lot of information at once, like with Mary Beth's Redding's presentation, for me personally, it got a little long into the night. I don't know for others, but my day starts potentially, a little early in the morning. And so going that late on a Monday night, I'm not as focused at the end of the evening. And I want to make sure that I'm getting all the information and being able to stay alert. And so I don't know how others felt about going that late, but I think that if the presentations are going to go long because there are more questions, I think that's great to be able to ask questions as presentations are going on. But if that seems to be the case, that it's going longer, that we find good cutoff times to have them come back in the following meeting to complete their presentations instead of just trying to press to get as much information in one night, to just really find that good divide mark of going, when do we have, that information? And then, so I mean, it was a good segue, I think, to stop at the point where her recommendations were going to begin. So maybe when she, comes back at the next meeting, I think it's next Monday, she can do a brief maybe recap of what the first part of her presentation was, just in case, so that way kind of gets us all back up to speed, and then kind of go into the solutions. I think that would be very helpful. But I like, the ability that committee members are able to like ask questions and, kind of have that segue of going back and forth, where we have the natural breaks for questions. Because like if you wait too long, sometimes you miss certain slides and it's, going back too far and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I think I'd like to be a little bit more conscious about the lengths of certain meetings and all of the content in it, just so that way information doesn't get lost because it's going, later. I think would be mine. But I do like the speakers that we've had. I think they've brought a lot of value to the conversation so far. And so I think that that's been great. She is very knowledgeable, so I'm very excited to see what the rest of her presentation has to offer. And yeah, going forward with other solutions that might be kind of like the out of the box thinking, that city employees haven't already presented. So,
All right. Let me ask, sort of out of order, but I wasn't sure when to cut it off. Obviously, you could tell I was sort of moving. It was a bit of a moving target in the session. I mean, perhaps we should agree, on what the cutoff is, and just be, consistent about it. Because I obviously I understand the concern that people are tired, and pension stuff is, whether you like it or not, detailed. I don't know. Would it make sense to? So one of the things I guess I've been feeling is the hour and a half has felt a little constrained, and some of the feedback I was getting earlier was we're just not getting enough done. So I'm a little bit caught between the two things. What would people think about, cutting it off, hard cut off at 8:30?
I think that would be a good time.
I'm in favor of that.
Yeah, I think it allows enough time. I mean, 2 hours is a good time, I think, to allow, things to, the questions and stuff from the committee members, and, getting through the roll call and the minutes and stuff like that. Cause you have to account for all of that time as well as the next person's presentation or completion of the presentation from the time before. And so all of that needs to be accounted for. So yeah, I think 2 hours would be a sufficient amount of time.
Okay. All right. So let's, I'm following my first name order here. Grant, I think, is the next is the next up. So sort of same questions to you.
Well, I do believe that the hour and a half is a little on the short side by the time we get the meeting organized, go through all of the required functions of the meeting. I would be in favor of holding to a set time. So if we're going to go for 2 hours, I think that's a reasonable amount of time. Given the depth of the presentations and the questions that we've had, that may even be a little on the short side. So I'd want to make sure that when we do schedule speakers, we do have time for follow-up afterwards if need be. I want to try and find the balance between making sure everyone is able to speak unconstrained and have their questions answered, but also try to find the balance of keeping people on topic and focused on the agenda at hand. Some of the questions, some of the comments were a bit rambling and off topic, and I don't want to try and be too heavy-handed in not letting people explore ideas as they come up, but it does make for the presentations to be less focused and much longer to get through. So that's a balance that I think we need to try and find. Going towards that, I think at the executive committee level, we need to talk not so much about what is going to be on the agenda, but what the goal of that agenda topic is going to be, and discuss more of what end we want to get to, so that John, you as the facilitator, can steer the conversation going towards that goal, and you know where the executive committee wants to get to at the end of that now 2 hours, rather than you trying to figure out where we want to explore. So if the executive committee gives you feedback of what the end of an agenda item is, that may help you in helping us reach that, rather than trying to put it on you to figure out where we're going to explore.
Makes sense. So I'm gonna, once we go once around the horn here, I'm gonna actually lay out for you what I consider to be the approaches that I know of, let me put it that way, to this issue. And to be clear, I know there will be other ideas from people from the committee, and that's good. That's what I want. But at least you'll have an idea of what, the material I know we need to get to in this area, and we can build on that. And I know, again, I'm very sensitive to the idea that, the impetus of this committee was, in part, I think, to be able to explore both ideas that are, quote, in the box, and those that are outside the box. But it's going to be up to you guys to decide whether ideas that are outside the box are so far outside the box that you don't consider them practical or not. And that's, that's ultimately what you guys are about. My job is to bring you the options. All right, Herbert, you are next in first name order.
Thank you. As far as the 2 hours is concerned, I'm perfectly okay with that idea. I know people have families and obligations outside of this activity. I just want to highlight the following point. If the city's unfunded obligation is $600 million, that's several times our annual budget. If the city has a reduction of close to $850 million since it lost its surplus on top of that, I think that this is such a significant number and such a treacherous number to the city's finances that it behooves for us to have the type of discussions in depth that would lead to practical solutions in the future. And as I see it, we have had this artificial deadline of January the 1st. And we need to give the city council a summary of what we have accomplished so far and why there is not, in my opinion, sufficient time, given these limitations. If we're not willing to do 3-4 hours discussions, if we're going to limit it to 2 hours, then we need to extend the number of meetings we're going to have well beyond January. And it is my suggestion that we give a summary to the city council such that they can evaluate the need for these meetings to continue beyond that. The number is so amazingly huge. The precariousness of the financial situation to the city of Glendale is so great that we cannot create an artificial limit for January, and also create a limitation on the number of meetings per month, and create a limitation on the number of hours we're going to discuss, and create a limitation on the possible number of speakers. You cannot have all of that and then say we have a substantial problem, an existential problem, as Councilman Najarian said, to the city, and make these limitations in a very artificial way. I don't think that there is a specific reason why these meetings cannot be extended. So I want to continue with the following. I think that our meetings need to have a context that is available, easily digestible to the public. That's why I initially suggested summaries, so that at least the summary information be accessible to the general public. But also, we need to put it in context of what the pension system has created in terms of deficiencies, in terms of services and infrastructure to the city, and the significant debt that we have placed ourselves in. Putting it in context is really important, and we should be assigning time to understand the magnitude of the problem and what it has cost the city of Glendale. And I'd like for this committee to suggest a time and the hours needed for us to put it in context. I also have submitted several suggested speakers. I want to also suggest from the Reason Foundation, Mr. Leonard Gilroy. He is willing and able to come to speak to us, and we need to have individuals who have a contrarian approach to our thinking and to what I would call the usual proposals and the usual proposers with regard to particular solutions. The letter from Mr. Kadikian that we all received today, I think hits the point quite well. We need to be open to considering points of view that are significantly different from what other cities have done. And to that extent, I also believe that we should take a look at all of the solutions that other cities have created, including the potential solution of declaring bankruptcy, if that's where we're headed, the disbanding of the Glendale Police Department, if that's a solution, the disbanding of the Glendale Fire Department, if that's a solution, the replacement with the county, if that is a solution, the replacement of the paramedics with private companies, if that's a solution. We need to be able to come up with solutions that really face the problem that we're facing significantly. Upfront, no holds barred. Without that, we're simply adapting and accepting whatever limitations we've been given so far. And that, I don't think, will serve the public well. So put it in context, bring individuals who are going to definitely address alternatives that other cities have done, how extreme they can be, because we need to put this thing in context to the general public as to how serious this problem is. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonard. All right, Mike, I believe is Mike, are you, excuse me, I know you're, looks like you're trying to unmute, but we're not hearing you. Maybe on the tech end, have an idea what's going on here.
Might be the device that Mr. Bain is using. I notice he's logged in from a mobile device. We just can't hear him now, but it's not an issue of mute or unmute on our end. He just logged off. Looks like he's going to try to log back in, so you may want to go to the next speaker.
Okay, Zara.
Thank you, Mr. Holtzman. I'd like to echo Allison's comments in terms of the length of the meeting. I do think that while I don't really have any issues with long meetings, I do have issues with meetings that go well past what they're scheduled for, and especially considering our general meetings are in the evening, having those meetings go well past what they're scheduled for significantly impacts those people who do start their day very early, and also our ability to meet our other responsibilities that are upon us. So I'm open to the 2-hour suggestion, and I'm open to 2.5 hours. I'm open to 3 hours, as long as it's scheduled beforehand, and so that's clear what the expectation is, and that the committee members and staff can plan accordingly for that. In terms of Mr. Grant's comments, I concur with his comments as well regarding questions. Questions are good. Lengthy premises to questions, hypotheticals that may or may not be pertinent to what's being discussed, or topics that aren't really addressing what that specific 3 or 4 slides, for example, in our last meeting are referencing, I think just serve to lengthen out. What they do is they're counterproductive. They shorten the time that we have as a committee to hear the things that we need to hear in order to create a foundation so that we can then move on to, what are the solutions? What are the potential solutions? I agree with Mr. Milano that we shouldn't be out of hand rejecting any potential solutions, but those solutions have to be legal solutions. It can't just simply be let's explore ending everybody's benefits and taking them away, and there are consequences to breaking agreements, contract agreements, breaking state law, and I'm not really sure that that we need to explicitly spell out that no, we can't break state law. However, I think everything that we're doing up to this point is creating a foundation for what this pension potential crisis might look like. And so I'm not sure I would necessarily agree to having, one or two specific meetings to, put things in context. I think the stakeholders involved in this process, whether they are, the people who are getting the pension benefits with the state employees, or the taxpayers in the city, are sophisticated enough to follow along, these discussions the same way we do. And so, I'm not sure that it's completely necessary to spell out exactly what the doom and gloom looks like. I think that's fairly clear from, what other municipalities are going through, and, what everybody understands in terms of the amounts of monies that we're talking about relative to the city's budget. I also agree with Mr. Michaels in terms of the executive committee's role in shaping not specifically what goes on the agenda, but more so how and what we want to accomplish, and then allowing you as the facilitator who has the experience to guide the committee in order to reach those goals. So the executive committee is almost like the board, and we're looking at you to really help us meet what our end goals are. I am open to exploring whether or not, the January 1st or January deadline for this committee is sufficient. And I think we are getting to a point here in the middle of November with holidays coming up where that might be a real issue, considering the manner in which we are progressing here in terms of our meetings and what we're covering. I think that should be something that we should get input from staff and get a clear idea of what city council's potential openness to that sort of idea might be. And if the answer to that is no, it's going to be cut off in January, then that's fine. Those are the constraints then we do have to work under as a committee. And I think we need to modify our process in order to accommodate that. Having said that, I have found that I haven't heard much from a vast majority of the committee members on this committee up to this point. Many people who I think whose opinions would be very beneficial in terms of what we've heard, and there are several variables and factors that play into that, mostly because we have a 15-person committee, 14 ostensibly, considering one member hasn't shown up. But you have a 14-member committee, and ostensibly you have an hour and a half for that meeting. When you have one or two or three committee members, you kind of dominating the time, in terms of what the committee members are presenting or asking, that creates significant issues and barriers to other committee members who may have some expertise and insight into what's going on, into presenting their opinion. So I appreciate your continued attempts to come up with ways to regulate that. And I think it it's past time that you take a little bit of a firmer hand in terms of our committee meetings in entertaining questions or premises or long comments that aren't really, at the subject matter at hand. And then finally, I know I reached out to you, and I witnessed a public comment by one of our committee members during a city council meeting, during which this committee member represented themselves as a member of this committee prior to making the comments, and then proceeded to use language that gave the implication both to the city council and to the public that this committee member was speaking on behalf of the committee. And I found those comments and the manner in which those comments were made to be extremely inappropriate, considering that this committee, first of all, it has reached no consensus on any issues, and having a member represent that they are speaking as a committee member on behalf of the committee, I think is inappropriate and, quite frankly, is counterproductive to what our goals are as a committee. And so I would hope, in addition to Mr. Garcia's very fine Brown Act presentation in our last meeting, that there will be some discussion in terms of what is appropriate when a committee member is speaking in public, whether it's public comments to the city council or at a homeowners association or a coffee party. I do not think it's appropriate for committee members to portray themselves and their comments and their personal opinions as being that of the entire committee.
So let me.
I can give more details regarding that if anybody has any questions regarding it.
Yeah, and let me say, I did go and listen to this particular statement. It's not made by anybody who's on right here today, and I did think it was highly inappropriate because, to be clear, the statement was made by saying the committee feels X, the committee feels Y, we, and I did feel that was a significant concern, and I was planning on, I'd actually originally planned on raising it at the beginning of the last meeting, but I was so concerned that Mary Beth had such a long agenda that it was going to precipitate a conversation that was going to take out time from Mary Beth's time. I will say that, and just to be clear, of course, people have their First Amendment right to address the council, and nobody is saying otherwise. That's fine. But I think we could all agree that nobody should be speaking for this committee without the committee's authorization and without the committee having, frankly, reached agreement that that's the message they want to send. So I do think I was very concerned about that.
I appreciate that, Mr. Holtzman.
Mr. Milano, I think you had your hand up.
I don't know why we're not saying that it was the presentation of Susan Wolfson during the city council session. I personally have an opinion with regard to the issue to which she spoke, because I spoke as well, but not as a member of this committee, nor did I mention the committee. But as a matter of concern that the city went ahead and decided to create an MOU or approve an MOU while this session evaluating the pension system was taking place. The subject that she's presenting was a valid topic to be presented. Whether it's inappropriate for her to have mentioned that she was a member of the committee, I think it's subject to the opinion of us here. I believe that she was implying, we are now studying and appraising the pension system. And as a result of that, she's making an opinion, basically of someone who is perhaps more knowledgeable than most people out there in the city with regard to this issue, as a way of validating her position. That's the way I took it. Now, unless Mr. Amiri wants to become a sergeant at arms here for our committee, I began to take exception as limiting our process or creating conditions under which we're not able to explore other things. I don't particularly appreciate being limited by another committee member onto the topics that we're going to have ahead of us. If Mr. Amirian believes that pretty much anyone here is sophisticated enough to evaluate, for example, the impact of this pension obligation is, perhaps he can elucidate that for us and maybe take 3-5 minutes and tell us why we're here. Why is this such an important issue and how it has impacted the city? Because if he can verbalize it, that will give me the assurance that if he can do it, pretty much anybody can do it. I have certain opinions as to how the impact is because I've been following the city's budget for many, many years. And I've been in front of city councils for at least 18 years talking about this issue and warning the city council from well before 2005 when they passed the other MOU with the GMA, where I disapproved of that and spoke against it. So I've been at it for quite a long time and looking at the CAFR every single year in detail and purchase them in order to study the impact that it may have on the city. And I know what it has. That information is not available to everyone. And I don't believe that everyone who is even in our committee knows the impact that we have had with regard to the deficiencies that the city has had to tolerate as a result of this problem.
So, Mr. Milano, if I could just, because we haven't heard from Mr. Bain, but let me just say in response briefly, I don't think anybody on this committee is criticizing the content of what Ms. Wolfson or for that matter you had to say to the council. I think we can all agree, though, that we shouldn't speak in the name of the committee until we're prepared to speak in the name. I think that, does that seem fair? You're muted.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, so that's my only, there's no criticism implied here. I want to be very clear of the views that were expressed. Those are completely legitimate views. You're also not alone in those views, by the way. I don't think, I just want to be very, very clear. The integrity of the committee is very important to me. Obviously, I've got a little bit of a personal stake in it, and I don't want to get out in front of the committee. I don't think any member of the committee should. That's my own point. Mike, let's try this again, maybe. Mike, I see him down there.
Mr. Holtzman, I've unmuted everybody and I can't seem to unmute Mr. Bain.
Okay. All right. Well, when Mike, if we can figure out if we can get you back, just speak up as soon as as you're back, and we will. Because I'd very much like, especially because you're an actuary, to hear your take on this. So let me move on to I think what some of the again, I really don't like the word solutions that at least I'm seeing. Just again, this is really from, in fairness, my personal experience around this issue, and having litigated a fair amount in this area as well. So Mr. Bain. So the what I'll call the sort of normative approaches that have been taken to this issue, I should say, I mean, the underlying issue, which I think we can all kind of agree, and we'll hear more about this probably too next time with rest of Mary Beth, is that we have this unfunded liability, and so the unfunded liability is a dollar number. It's and we can debate maybe a little bit about what that dollar number is, but we have a pretty good idea what that dollar number is. We have a reasonable idea of what it could go to, although, as Mary Beth pointed out, she's looking at the 25th and 75th percentile likelihoods, not the 100 and the 0. So it could get worse even than she's predicting, or of course it could be better. The challenge is it's an amount of money that the city owes, and like a mortgage, except a really big mortgage. So the normative solutions are sort of, how do you deal with this very big? So one of the solutions that was, early on, certainly one of the things that the city did early on is increasing employee contributions to that. We're not necessarily at the end of that as a possibility. It poses a lot of, and I'm not giving the pros and cons here. There are a lot of pros, there are a lot of cons to this, but that continues to be an issue. It runs into some interesting issues when you're talking about going beyond half of the normal cost, because unfunded liability doesn't belong clearly to any one group, right? So a lot of the unfunded liability, if you were going to say it belongs to people who've already retired. Not exclusively. It also belongs to people who are still in the workforce. But unfunded liability doesn't have a tag on it. So there is no such thing as the unfunded liability of an individual. It's a group number, so it's challenging. But anyway, so higher contributions. Additional payments, either to Calpers or to what are called 115 plans. And you're going to hear about, Mary Beth will be talking about 115 plans next time. There's Mike. Mike, can you, okay, we see you, which is really good. Now we just have to hear you. You're still on. Can you try, John, unmuting everybody again?
I think I can speak.
Yes.
Okay.
So let's go back to the earlier question. Forget everything I just said in the last 5 minutes. And so the question was really, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Where do you feel we should be driving it? Those kinds of things. We lost him again. Okay. Oh, there he is. Now you're muted again. Let's see if we can unmute you.
Okay. I hear you again.
Good. There we go.
Okay. I'd just like to comment. I agree with what several people have said. I think, we don't have a lot of time. We've got a lot of members, and we need to allow multiple people to speak. I think it's difficult because I don't think we have a clear agenda for what the end solution, not an actual solution, but what the goal is. I feel like we're kind of wandering, and while I do agree that it's useful to have the background, I don't want to get over bogged down in the background. And in fact, I'm not sure when we deal with things like labor organizations and
Give Mike. Step it back. Oh, here he is. Mike.
Yes.
Okay. Labor organizations was the last word we heard.
Right. To me, my goal would be to present a workable solution, not to just say, well, we could do this, we could walk away, we could bite the bullet and have this huge liability, and let's be done with it. The reality of a pension plan is it's a promise to pay people a certain amount of money, and the rest of this is timing of the contributions. If you've committed to pay X, that's a real number that's going to play out over time. And you either put more money in sooner or more money in later. But the end cost of what you're going to pay out doesn't change unless you're changing benefits through the labor organization and your agreements there. So that.
Okay, I'm gonna. It sounded like he was winding up his comment there. So why don't I go back to my little list here, things, and then we can sort of build on. So I was mentioning 115 plans. 115 plans, to make a long story short, are accounts that the city itself has set up. You have a 115 plan. You can contribute more to 115 plans or less. 115 plans are a very flexible vehicle. They have the advantage of allowing you to manage your own money. Oh, there's Mike. Mike is back, I think.
I think I'm gonna stop here because I'm having too many audio problems.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. So to make a long story short, and I won't, because obviously we're going to be talking about all this throughout. That's an alternative. Does allow. We're talking about 115 plans here. Does allow some flexibility. It does allow you to put away more money. You can also do it by putting more money into Calpers itself. One of the big issues, very hot these days, pension obligation bonds, and I know that that was a conversation that was had in the city a number of years ago. It's now something that it went from being very popular to being very unpopular. It is now very popular again. Pension obligation bonds, to make a long story short, allow you to pay off your entire liability potentially to Calpers and to fund it at a much lower rate. Calpers' discount rate currently of 7%. You can put out a pension obligation bond well under 4%. So you have what they refer to as interest rate arbitrage. There are lots of risks and benefits to that approach as well, and I would like to have a presenter on the issue. Herbert.
Hi, Mr. Holtzman. I've on the topic of issuing bonds. I was on the website of the Government Financial Officers Association.
Yes.
And they have produced several documents that would be worthwhile for us to review. Sure. It is my impression from reading those documents that they disapprove of that idea. So I think it is worthwhile for us to produce a copy of those and submit it to the rest of the committee.
Well, yeah, I agree. But again, these are whole big topic areas. So I'm responding to a number of members of the committee are saying, where's this all going, right? What are these, what kinds of options are we looking at? I'm giving you an overview of what I'll call, with deference to Herbert, the conventional options. And I don't mean by conventional, I don't know, that's not necessarily a bad thing. These are the ones that are generally in currency. There obviously are issues, state legislative issues, that the group can take up. These would not obviously have a direct impact, because again, Calpers is one system, so you'd be seeking to change Calpers. There is, bankruptcy is, well, I wouldn't say it's an option in the sense that I don't think you're bankrupt. But to be clear, when people talk about pension obligations are dismissible in bankruptcy. So I mean that's an actual thing. I would emphasize very clearly here that does not mean you're anywhere close to bankruptcy or that you could legitimately declare bankruptcy. Simply that, as a conceptual matter, that's possible. You should know that the two major cities that have declared bankruptcy based on essentially this kind of debt, Stockton and Vallejo, neither one made any change in pension, even though they declared bankruptcy. They did make a big change in retiree health in both cases, and I've represented both. There is the issue of final compensation, and again, this treads a little bit into the area of labor, and so you have to be a little bit thoughtful about it. But to a limited extent, how quickly compensation goes up affects obviously your pension costs. So that's a conversation. There is withdrawal from Calpers. I think you've already heard what the number is. I definitely would put that in the category of not a realistic option, but it's not my job to take any options off the table. But it's what happens in when you withdraw from Calpers, as Mary Beth was explaining, is that you go from essentially a 7% discount rate down to what is now a little over 1%. That causes your unfunded liability to go from currently, most recent would have been about 30% unfunded. You go to about 60 or 70% unfunded, and that has just absolutely astronomical cost. And then you have these issues such as contracting out, et cetera. I would just emphasize that, or shrinking the workforce, generally speaking, one of the real challenges here is that unfunded liability, again, is a dollar number. And so you can have fewer employees. Fewer employees will result in you paying less to CalPERS for normal cost, but will have no effect at all on your unfunded liability. In fact, it will appear as though your rate per person goes up because you are you're essentially allocating that money based on fewer people. So shrinking workforces are actually, as a general matter, really bad for paying off unfunded liability. But it is, it is something, it's obviously an option on the table. So those are the kinds of options that I am, that are kind of in more general currency. I think probably it would make sense. I had a feeling Mr. Milano would volunteer some additional options.
So you mentioned a couple of things that are of particular interest to me, yes. Things that are relevant to the finances of the city with regard to any of these moves. In the event that the discount rate is lowered, where we have to pay additional amounts, it is very likely that the bond rating agencies are going to reduce our accreditation, should we say, with regard to the bonds that we have already issued, forcing the city to pay even more interest, perhaps, lowering the value of those particular bonds. So I think it has a financial impact beyond just the pension obligation. The other issue that you brought to my mind is the potential that I don't know enough of, that I'd like to know more, of those circumstances where the eventual action by CalPERS was to actually reduce the benefits. And I think this is relevant for the employee associations being represented in our committee, that I have seen or read of scenarios where the actual pension distribution, or the amounts that are being distributed every month, were actually reduced by CalPERS. I don't know if what I read was accurate or it was a video having to do with those issues, but I think that all the employee unions should know that there might be some serious repercussions if we don't address this. And I am of concern for those individuals who are not necessarily getting the huge pensions that police and fire and management are getting. And so I think that should be an item of discussion as well. Can the employees' pensions be reduced by some type of action that occurs as a result of what the city of Glendale decides to do with CalPERS? So I need to know more about that, and I'd like to perhaps address some time for that to be discussed.
Other thoughts, staff too, by the way. I mean, John or Michelle or Frida to jump in.
Just to address Mr. Milano's second comment there, my understanding as far as what PERS can do for reducing benefits to current workforce is if the city does not pay their payment to PERS. So far, that has not been the case. There have been some very small cities that I know of, a couple, I think, that basically have, very small workforce, didn't pay their bill, and the benefits can then get reduced. That has not been an issue in Glendale. Definitely an option, something that can happen if we don't make that payment. But definitely is not something that we've done. And I was gonna comment on your first part of your statements, and I'm sorry, I just went blank on what those were. So maybe it'll come to me in a second. But
Mr. Michaels, I noticed you had your hands up. Sorry, the hand thing on here is so small that I need to wear my glasses to see it.
Yes, I want to make sure everyone does have time to talk. I would encourage Mike Bain, if possible, to call in on a phone number so that we can at least hear him. But to address some of those concerns, getting back to the point where I think this committee should be talking about, if, for example, we are going to talk about the topic of getting out of Calpers, which I've heard many times, or firing the police and fire and contracting with the county, rather than putting that on the agenda as an item for discussion, I'd like to see that come forward with staff having done an analysis of, if we do get out of Calpers, our unfunded liability right now is $680 million. The number I've heard, it then becomes $2.8 billion. If we're going to get out of Calpers, that number doesn't just evaporate and disappear. The city still needs to pay it. And the first thing I think we should start with for a discussion is, what option do we have to pay that? Is the city going to go ahead and issue $2.8 billion in bonds to pay that over time? What would the impacts be? How would we pay that is where I would start the discussion for that. I don't want to see, as Mr. Milano has said, he wants to keep brevity and wants the presentations to be brief and hold to time limits. I want to try and look at the other end of look at what the ends are, have the context within that discussion, and say, if the end goal of exploring this becomes the interest in paying off the unfunded liability directly at 2.8 is much greater than staying in and going through the Calpers system, I'd like to look and see what the ends are before we explore a lengthy discussion of that. So that's where I'm trying to lead when I say I want to look at the ends of an agenda item and stay focused on that. During that time, we do have the option to explore other ideas, other solutions that may be out of the box, but it would help us to track what we're going, where we want to go, what we want to explore, what we want to accomplish, if we stay focused on that.
So I guess, the challenge is this: what's the best way, to present? We'll take that issue, right? Let's just take that issue, getting out of Calpers. You sort of suggested, Mr. Michaels, and I get it. I mean, that maybe there needs to be a staff paper or something like that, which, I mean, in theory could be done, although, I'm also conscious of the budget of this. So I'm trying to, and at some point we are going to have to write a report anyway. Maybe starting to write a draft of it in that respect, and then starting at that point make some makes some sense. I don't know.
Mr. Holzer,
Yes.
I want to address a point that Mr. Michaels bring up. I think the other side of the issue of the of that potential obligation to Calpers by issuing bonds to pay the outstanding debt. The other side of the coin is the continual accumulation, right, of the unfunded liability out of the problem of Calpers not being able to sustain year after year the promised returns on those investments. In other words,
Sure.
the current problem will continue to be exacerbated. It will not be abated. It just simply removes the debt. But every year, if they continue to perform the way they have for the past 20 years, we still are going to wind up with an additional $170,000 a week, getting into the hole. So we may solve that partially. So we need to address what is the current structure that continues to put us in the hole. So we pay the debt, but then we wind up still with a continuing shortage.
I don't disagree, but I think to Mr. Michael's point, the concrete question is, is there any world in which you could get $2.8 billion to pay this off? And that's point one. And then point two is, would it even make sense? Because you have another alternative, which is pay off all of the unfunded liability, which is essentially a pension obligation bond, pay off all the unfunded liability that you currently have, knowing full well that you may grow some additional unfunded liability, but it isn't going to be $2 billion worth of unfunded liability. So the other part of Mr. Michael's implicit question, I think, is, would it make sense? Is this logical? For $600 and some odd million, you can pay off your entire unfunded liability from Calpers. It is absolutely true that they could regrow unfunded liability. Completely true under that circumstance. But are they going to regrow $2 billion worth of additional unfunded liability? Probably not. Yeah, Mr. Milano.
Okay. Yeah. With all due respect,
yeah,
you have just given us your opinion
totally.
on the potential. We have a full generation, right? 20 years of experience with the ups and downs and the surprises that the weather and the economy brings us. And given 20 years of history, in my opinion, the likelihood of us having continual problems that are going to be exacerbated by either problems with climate or additional problems with competition, potentials with war, lots of things that can disrupt the economy, right? Which is one of the areas that I suggested for discussion, that our MOUs and our agreements do not take into account the severe setbacks that the economy can face. And so in major downturns, those continual obligations continue unabated, right? And even more so when there's an economic downturn. And that needs to be addressed. If we pay off that debt, assuming that we can sell the GWP, use part of those funds and pay part of that debt, right? Sell it to Edison as a solution. We still have the problem of current employees drawing a significant amount of potential pension into the future. And so tackling one side and not tackling the other is a disservice to every poor. Well, if we're going to continue going the way we are.
My only point, and I'm going to go to Mr. Michaels a second. My only point, I do not intend to insert my own opinions here other than to give you some points about what are the pros and cons here about some of these issues. That's all. But Mr. Michaels, you had your hand up.
My point was I want to try and stay focused on what a potential solution is. And for example, when Mr. Milano points out, there is a distinction between a pension and a private industry 401k or other type of retirement benefit. A pension is something that's guaranteed. The idea is you're going to attempt to forecast the weather like meteorologists try and do. We all complain that they don't get it right often enough. So it becomes the issue of, do we get out of a pension completely? That's contractual. I would ask the question, is that something that this committee has within its purview for us to look at? And I want to try and see what is on our agenda, what we are focused to do. I want the executive committee to stay focused on that. The length of meetings, the schedule of meetings, how long we go off into the future, if it's 2 months, if it's 2 years, I don't have any finite limit that I want to put on this. I do want to do it right, but the term scope creep is coming to my mind with this committee, with these discussions. And scope creep says when we start to look at one thing, and if you go off on all of the other tangents, you never finish a conclusion, and we don't have a solid point to say, we've decided this, let's move on to the next issue and see if we can move in a direction and accomplish something. So my comments are looking more to try and limit scope creep, keep us focused, and have this committee be able to deliver accomplishments that either the committee can continue to build on, the city can build on, and we can make decisions going forward. When we keep opening a discussion and having it continue to grow, it doesn't necessarily help us very much. So those are my general comments. And when we talk about should we outsource emergency services to the county, I'd like to see a general analysis of that, because oftentimes we hear those discussions, or in a previous discussion, I heard a comment talking about the 100-year bond rate, discussing what the investment for Calpers should be. The 100-year bond rate really doesn't impact what current investments are for Calpers, for the investment structure. Bonds right now aren't delivering anywhere near the yield they were decades ago. That isn't a viable option. Bonds are hardly covering the cost of inflation right now. So that's where I want us to try and stay focused on what we think the issue is, what a potential solution is. And if we have someone from Calpers come to talk with us, I would rather us, the committee, be able to say, here is the best effort from staff, or what we think it would take to end the contract with Calpers, and have a discussion with someone from Calpers to vet what that possible solution is, to give us a better point than saying we'll bring someone in from Calpers and have a discussion from the start and see where it goes. So those are my points, and I want to try to see the executive committee stay focused on those type of issues.
Hang on, Mr. Milano. I just want to make sure, because you've spoken a number of times. I want to see if there's other comments first. Speak. Okay, looks like you're up.
All right. One of the reasons why I like someone of Mr. Michael's background in our committee is because he does a great job of with his experience in bringing staying true to a project and staying true to the deliverables. I personally see this deliverable of looking at the continuation of the current structure of the MOUs as being germane to the topic. And I'll give Mr. Michaels an analogy of this, because I've been a project manager to very large installations as well in computer systems. Oftentimes when a company asks for a computer system to solve a problem or a growth problem, what they don't take into account oftentimes is their strategic plan, or the fact that many individuals are not aligned with the problem. So all they're doing by replacing a computer system and all the software is simply making it faster, but doing the same problems as before. And in a way, that is the background that I bring to this committee, that the addressing the current structure of the MOUs is germane to keeping the city solvent into the future and avoiding the problem that we're facing now. And so all my respect to Mr. Michaels, I really appreciate that level of focus, but I don't think that my opinions with regard to addressing those issues are not related to the problem that we're facing. And I want to keep that in the back burner for future discussion. Thank you.
All right. First of all, can you hear me? Because I just got a text that people were having trouble hearing me. We're good. Okay. So
We have a hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Michelle, I'm sorry.
So I just wanted to just remind the committee that going into the future, we do have PEPRA for our employees. Anybody new into the Calpers system are PEPRA employees. That by nature, that is designed to be a lower benefit and eventually a lower cost. And what we are trying to get through is these next 10 or so years, 10 to 12 years perhaps, of the hump of our rates. And what I mean by that is, and if you recall from Mary Beth Redding's presentation, you see our rates continue to climb and then they start to trail down. And that is the point where more PEPRA employees are in the system and our unfunded liability is starting to get paid down because now the PEPRA folks have a lesser benefit, which costs us less. So the long-term picture does look better from the standpoint of the benefit that is being offered to the PEPRA employees. So I just wanted to make sure everybody remembers that in your discussions. And I do remember Mr. Milano's initial comment with regards to our bond rating. If our bond ratings are downgraded, it does not change what we pay on the debt for those bonds. That does not have an implication. So I just wanted to clarify that as well.
And that's because you have a fixed rate on the bonds.
Correct.
So here, let me make a couple of things. So first of all, as far as the timing goes and whether we are going to need additional time, here's my suggestion. First of all, to be clear, we had said we would finish at the end of January, not the beginning of January. So, so we're not, although admittedly December is not the world's best month to get stuff done. You know, we're not up against our deadline just yet. My suggestion is that we wait, another 2 meetings or so before we take up the question of whether we want to write a letter to council. I think honestly also because the more we've done, the more we've seen, the better our case, if that's what we need to do. And I would like the opportunity to keep, kind of plowing along. I know there's been a little bit of frustration in terms of the issue of how to get to the end point, but I have felt very strongly, and I still do, that laying a good foundation of what all the stuff's about and what the challenges are is really important before we jump to solutions. So you can blame me for that, but that has sort of been my view. And again, whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. But that's just sort of been my my view. I particularly think that the information that we get from Bartel and Associates really gives us a very three-dimensional view. Michelle is right, although potentially wrong about the fact that is a 10 or 12-year problem, unless it turns out it's not. If returns turn out to be terrible for the next 10 years, then it's not a 10 or 12-year problem. So those kinds of things are, I think, really critical. What I would like to do, I think that when we're talking about potential solutions, that it's useful to try some of these out. I mean, some of these, like bankruptcy. Mary Beth is not somebody to ask about bankruptcy. There are other people who are more knowledgeable about bankruptcy than she is. But on the issues of greater contributions, all these sorts of things, these are things she is prepared to talk about next time. I'd like us to spend some real time with her, asking questions about these potential ways in which we can go. I'd like to bring in a speaker on pension obligation bonds. I think it's really one of the hottest topics right now. Absolutely, I know everybody has an immediate reaction one way or another. I think we should have an informed reaction, and I'm not, to be clear, I'm not pro or con, but it is an opportunity. were it to go that way, and if were the city fathers to want to, and mothers want to do it, a way of paying off, a lot of liability and lowering the interest rate on that liability. So it's a very real thing. So I'd like to bring somebody in on that specifically. On the withdrawal question, and I'm sensitive to, on the one hand, not wanting to cut off opportunities, and on the other, the challenges of, I'm not entirely sure who the right person on withdrawal would be. I mean, I can try to look, maybe Mr. Milano, if that's kind of your perspective, maybe look to you also for ideas on somebody who's an actual advocate of withdrawal. I actually don't have anybody at hand. I'm as far as I know, I'm the only person who's taken anybody through a voluntary withdrawal from Calpers. And nothing in my experience made me think, oh, let's do that again. It seems to me that we have, between the Calpers and to Mr. Michael's point about, the Calpers person just bringing them in, I mean, I think there are a number of things that I would like the Calpers person to speak to. One, Mr. Milano, hang on a sec. Let me just finish my thought. There is, I think, a view, I certainly shared it until the last couple of years, that Calpers has been a bad actor in all of this. And I'm not sure that whether they are or they're not really goes to the question of what you're doing as a group, but it does go in some ways to this whole question of, do we have our wagon hitched to an out of control train or not? I mean, what confidence do we have in Calpers moving forward? And I think that is an important thing for it colors your choices as a committee. I would say, I mean, I'm maybe a little biased here as a guy who spent a good deal of time writing, critiques of Calpers, that the current leadership there is pretty thoughtful. I'm not suggesting they're right or wrong or they're taking the right approaches, but I think they present some very interesting. I mean, let me just give you a very specific example. The current leadership is pushing very hard right now to get to do far more in the area of private capital. Now, I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea, and I suspect there could be disagreement in this committee about whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, but it seems to me you should be exposed to that debate. That's my feeling about it, at least. So I guess what I'm saying is, in the next two sets of sessions, between Mary Beth and the solutions and the questions, the getting somebody from Calpers, who I think is going to be essentially the number two person there, and dealing with pension obligation bonds, 115, that probably is the next two sessions, give or take. If you guys are okay with that, I'm certainly open to any other solution, but that's kind of what I had in mind. Mr. Milano.
I would like to add that if we are going to have a representative from Calpers, that we have an expert, preferably on how Calpers has performed. I don't want to simply hear Calpers prepared speech and presentations. And if we choose not to have a speaker against Calpers, I can present my own analysis. I can tell you some items that are, to me, shocking, like their investment in Nikola, a company without any sales whatsoever. The speculation involvement of Calpers is just astonishing from any investor's point of view. And so we need individuals who are going to be hard with regard to their perception of what Calpers has done. If you know anything about stocks or anything about kind of investments, looking at the Nikola investment is just mind-boggling. Do we want a pension system that is spending tens of millions of dollars on speculation? Or looking back at the history, it's just astonishing. And that is, the public needs to know that. Members of the committee needs to know that. Because if we're counting on that discount rate to be maintained, it is incredibly important that we address it.
So let me ask you this: who would you say is the most knowledgeable person who would critique Calpers' strategy?
Let me get back to you on that. I'll do the research and I'll make some suggestions for you.
Grant? You're muted. Oh,
I think we've got that sorted out. Trying to follow that up, looking at conversation of someone from Calpers, I completely agree with Mr. Milano that we do want to have a independent review and to challenge them on that. But looking at other ideas, I'm looking at diminishing returns. If we were to challenge Calpers' representative to defend Calpers, or I would expect that we would defend Calpers.
Right.
If we're going to look at other solutions, we've talked about whether legislative, legal, or other solutions. So it becomes a question of, can the city lobby Sacramento and at a legislative level to place better restrictions, better controls on Calpers? Of how do we look at what the problem is and can we propose a solution? If Glendale, for example, could lead with the Southern California Association of Governments, lead a legislative effort to try and reform some of bad acting that Calpers has done, that I see as a solution that we could promote, and other cities, other municipalities, other members of Calpers would be able to join that effort. I think there would be a benefit to that. So those are the type of solutions I want to try and have the committee explore, rather than get bogged down in details where we point to diminishing returns.
Well, skipping the rather part for a second, I completely agree with you on that, and that's something we can present. We can have presented, I guess I should say. There are a number of, putting aside sort of magic wand solutions for a minute, right? There are some critical problems in the structure of how we relate to CalPERS. Some of them, one of them is a constitutional issue, which is that CalPERS does not owe a fiduciary duty to its member agencies because of an amendment to the California Constitution. It's really a critical problem. The CalPERS board and how the CalPERS board is structured is a significant problem for local entities. So there are all kinds of very significant things that could be done on the legislative level. Also, that are things that are more specific as well, like what's pensionable, what's not, all those sorts of things. So I think that there's we can definitely have. Actually, the great expert on CalPERS legislative stuff came out of League of Cities, and ironically, I'm not trying to hawk our people, but he's the head of our lobbying group. So, we can develop a list of those kinds of things. I'd love to see this committee make legislative recommendations and to help be a part of building, even if you're going to be early on in the effort, building consensus around some of the building blocks of what could be done there. Michelle, you had your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to go back to Mr. Michael's comment with regards to the payment of potentially terminating and how we get there. And if the executive committee wants us to do any of that analysis so that we can get started on that, we can try and do that. We don't have nearly $3 billion in a bank account to be able to turn over to CalPERS. that those payments are done, they want those in a very short period of time, so it would require some sort of bonding or debt. So we would need some time to do a little bit of an analysis. So if the executive committee wants to see something to that nature, then I'd like to have my staff start working on that sooner rather than later.
I think it would be, I mean, I think it'd be useful to know whether that's real, but I'll ask the committee what I mean. I don't know how, I mean, when I look at $2.8 billion, I'm kind of like, I don't know what that would look like, but maybe you do.
Not
Well,
really. It would be a lot.
As I'm the one who raised that as an issue, that is a question that I see. And if we're going to have a discussion of that, my goal would be to give staff as much time as possible to come up with the best answer they can for that. Because if as we're asking it right now, the answer that you're saying is you'll need time to figure that out. So my intent was, if we're going to put topics on the agenda like getting out of Calpers, I'd like to give staff as much forethought as possible to look at how we would do that and what the end result would be. And I think that would benefit the conversation about exiting Calpers if we have that information to start with. So speaking as a member of the committee, that is information I would like.
Okay, then let's, I think the answer is yes to that. Michelle, thank you for volunteering. Herbert, you're muted.
To Ms. Litt's troubles there for calculation, it is really my concern concerning the current PEPRA's personal wages. Because if we have a Democratic majority in Congress, and the likelihood that the Social Security taxable wages are raised to 400,000, that immediately we're going to have an obligation based on the current people who are covered by PEPRA. And I think that's real. It's probably even more likely to happen than our ability to be able to dismiss Calpers as our agency for.
I'll get you a legal answer on that. I believe that even though they set that limit with reference to Social Security, that it is actually not tied to it on an ongoing basis. It's tied to a different inflator. So I can take a look at that. I'll get you an answer. Sessions. Mary Beth, I'm sorry, somebody, am I missing a hand here? Mary Beth, we're going to finish out her. I did want to be sure you had a chance to ask her about, some of the, again, they're not solutions, some of the mitigations that she's talking about, and make sure we're not too rushed this coming time. As I say, Calpers, we can, in response to Mr. Michael's point, maybe sharpen up a little bit what those questions are for Calpers. I'd be interested in knowing. I think it'd be useful to have a critique of Calpers, and so, Mr. Milano, I'm going to look to you to see what you've come up with. I'll also look. The best I can think of offhand is probably Joe Nation at Stanford, but I don't know if his analysis is directly focused on how Calpers is done. It's a little bit more focused on what a risk-free rate would be. Anyway, and then the legislative piece we just talked about. I think that's we can set somebody up for that conversation. And I think the thing there is not really a question of what is in circulation as much as it is what could be in circulation. And one place to look for that. Actually, Mr. Milano had a suggestion earlier. maybe is Chuck Reed, former mayor of San Jose. He has been the author of, at this point, 2 failed state, when I say failed state initiatives, they never got on the ballot. So they didn't, they didn't fail because they got voted down. But he also was the author of San Jose. San Jose is an independent pension system. He was the author of reforms in San Jose. Frankly, didn't work out that well for a variety of reasons. But he's definitely one of the, more kind of aggressively thoughtful people in the pension space. And he might be somebody to bring in with some, for some out of the box discussion of what needs to happen legislatively. Chuck's a former client of mine, by the way, so I know. I don't know, what do people think about that as an approach for the next few sessions? Mike.
We'll try again. I'm back at a decent connection.
Hey.
I think that's a great idea because to me, one of the key issues is this all in or all out with Calpers. So we have limited ability to say it's too rich for our blood. Let's freeze the plan and let's go do something else, whatever we think would be good for our employees. We don't have that option. It's if you don't want to be all in with currently accruing benefits for everybody, then we want this giant multi-billion-dollar package. And nowhere else in the pension world other than in, government situations do we have that. Everybody else has the option of saying, let's just freeze it. Nothing wrong with that. You keep sending the money until everybody's paid off and all is good. And plans do that all the time. So I would like to explore that concept, which undoubtedly means a legislative change. And maybe there's no appetite for getting that done, but it's sure in my mind, a better solution than a multi-billion-dollar gift to Calpers.
I think that makes a ton of sense, and a lot. I mean, we've certainly all been saying that. It is illogical that if we say, okay, for our new employees, we haven't even hired these people yet. And we're going to say, okay, they're going to be on a defined contribution plan. That means we must exit Calpers as to all the people who are currently in the workforce or previously in the workforce. That's an illogical result.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Zara?
And then obviously you have to replace what type of pension benefits or what type of benefits you're going to be offering at that point. And then there's the consideration of whether or not the types of benefits that you offer will make you competitive for the types of people that you would like to attract to our city employees in order to maintain the levels of services that make the city of Glendale one of the premier cities of its size in the nation.
Yeah, hang on a sec. Let me just respond to that for a sec. Yeah, super important point. And let's remember, particularly in the area of police, for example, that it's extraordinarily hard to track police, even with the packages we have now. So that's a very legitimate concern. Mr. Milano, you're muted.
Certain opinions that have been expressed today and in past years, an argument that says if we do not provide the same equivalent type of pension or equivalent type of benefits or post-employment benefits or pay scales or any other issues having to do with how we are going to compensate employees, will result in a difficulty in hiring, not hiring the right individuals, and so forth. That argument has been made so many times through the times that I've watched city council meetings. Is that, has anyone really validated this, right? And does it really test against the individuals that I know have been fired or dismissed or moved out of the city? I can name names right now. Making those high payments, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have the best of employees. And so I would contest Mr. Amirian's contention. It sounds really good, but it hasn't been validated. And the other issue with regard to Glendale being a premier city, it isn't. It's not even listed in the top 100 cities in which to live. So let's be real. The problems that we have with infrastructure are severe. The level of the roads are severe. The level of lack of parkland is severe. Glendale is by far not one of the top 100 cities in the United States, let alone one of the premier cities. It isn't. The data doesn't show it, and it doesn't come up in any list. So let's not repeat what has been basically being fed to the city council for so long. The reason why we are in this mess, the reason for the lack of parkland, the reason for the bad roads, is the significant pension benefits that we have actually gotten ourselves into. And until you address the quality of life and how these two issues tie together, then it becomes really relevant and true. This is why I needed to have this committee approve the idea of looking at how this pension obligation and these payments to Calpers have impacted the quality of life in the city. Hundreds of millions of dollars in delayed infrastructure, hundreds of millions. So if we put it in context, the public will begin to appreciate why it is that this is so important for us to address. But no, we are not by far anywhere near being a premier city.
There we go. Thank you. So we're beyond our time. Do we have any, Hark, are there any any members of the public who want to speak? I don't know if there are any members of the public.
Hi, John. No, we have no callers.
Okay, thank you. All right. So if everybody is okay with my interim plan here, I will be talking obviously individually to many of you anyway. But this thing has been very, very helpful, certainly this session for me to understand where you guys are coming from. And as usual, I will attempt to adjust accordingly. Zara?
And just to be clear, I would like to agendize the item I suggested earlier regarding the appropriate manner in which committee members present themselves in public and represent themselves as members of the committee.
That sounds good. Mike Garcia, are you somewhere there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so is that, I assume we could do that. I guess here's a question for you. Is that a discussion item, or would you prefer me to just address it at the top of the meeting?
Yeah, I think it's probably better just to address it, put it on the agenda if you want, or just discuss about, sort of norms for the committee. And that would be one of them.
Is that acceptable to you, Zara?
Works for me.
Okay, great. So we'll put it up on the front.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been, as I say, very, very helpful.
You need a motion to adjourn, John?
I do. I heard one from Alice.
Move to adjourn.
Okay, second?
Second.
Arik, are we doing votes on motion to adjourn, or are we just?
Yeah, we don't need to. We could just, it could be accepted. But...
Okay. All right, then we're hereby adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.